It's been 31 years since the 1990 Iraqi brutal invasion of Kuwait, a historic shock, turned into a national Kuwaiti epic, when the aggressor violated the sovereignty of our country to overthrow its legitimacy, violating all international norms and laws.
We started to hear statements after statements from, the press media of Iraq attacking Kuwait, not recognizing what Kuwait has done during all that 4 or 5 years. Then Saddam Hussein himself involved his leadership to criticize Kuwait, and to criticize Kuwait heavily, and to accuse Kuwait that we are stealing their oils from the oil fields between Kuwait and Iraq. And we were surprised. But still, a lot of exchange of views took place. Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmed, at that time foreign minister, several times he went to Baghdad, beginning of 1990. Other leadership went in order to, tell them that there is nothing to be used against Kuwait. We have stood with you during the war. Why you are accusing us falsely? These are not authentical accuses. And we were afraid that there is a hidden demand, a hidden request, a hidden desire behind these claims. And the movement of the army also, they have put in, they upgrade the attendance of that military movement. And the head of states, like the late King Fahd, God bless his soil, of Saudi Arabia, Sheikh Zayed, God bless his soil, Hosni Mubarak, God bless his soil, started to move in order to calm the situation. The reply was not to go to the United Nations.
Thursday, August 2nd, 1990. At about 2 a.m. local time, the defunct Iraqi regime sent its troops across the borders and into Kuwaiti territories and occupied the country in an attempt to topple the legitimate leadership, sovereignty, and independent identity, turning Kuwait, the pearl of the Gulf, into a scene of utter chaos and destruction. Since the early hours of the invasion, the Kuwaiti government and people utterly rejected the flagrant aggression, and Kuwaitis both at home and overseas stood by the side of their legitimate leadership to defend their country, freedom, and sovereignty. Led by the late Emir Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah, the late Father Emir Sheikh Saad al-Abdullah al-Salim al-Sabah, the late Emir Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmed al-Sabah, who was a foreign minister at the time, His Highness the Emir Sheikh Nawaf al-Ahmed al-Sabah, who was the Minister of Defense at the time. And with the assistance of the Kuwaiti people, Kuwait was able to gain support of the international community, overcome the 204-day-long aggression, and achieve liberation.
For our big surprise, at the night of the 2nd of August, I remember well, because of, as I told you, the 3 days of relaxation which took place against what we were a week ago, I went for a dinner, invited to a dinner to bid farewell for the ambassador of Bahrain. At that time, he was leaving the United Nations. There was a dinner on his honor. At 9:15, I remember well, the maitre to one of the waiters of that restaurant came. He asking about us. He said, "Where is Ambassador Abu al-Hassan?" I said, "Yes, I am Ambassador Abu al-Hassan." He said that Ambassador Pickering, Thomas Pickering, the ambassador of the United States in the United Nations, wants to talk to you. And I went to the phone. He said, "Mohammed, do you know that Kuwait has been invaded?" He said, "I have received instruction from Washington, information and instruction to call for a Security Council resolution and to ask you as a country involved." Immediately, I went to tell my friends at the restaurant, and I rushed to the United Nations immediately. When I met, before that, I went to the office to call the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. At that time, it was around 6:30 early morning Kuwait time. New York time, it was around 11 o'clock p.m. or 10:30 p.m. of the 1st of August.
On Friday morning, 1990, August 3rd. The Arab foreign ministers held an emergency meeting in Cairo on the sidelines of the meeting of foreign ministers of Islamic countries, where they both condemned the invasion and demanded the Iraqi troops' withdrawal. On August 10th, another Arab League emergency summit took place in Cairo. The majority of Arab countries condemn the invasion and call on Iraq to withdraw its troops, and voted to send Egyptian, Syrian, and Moroccan military troops to the Gulf region to support Kuwait.
First choice is Arab League. Arab League is an organization for Arab countries. We are entitled to solve our problems in the Arab League. But when I met the Secretary General and presented to him on the 18th of July 1990, the only case which we have put, and the only information which I have passed to the Secretary General was on the 18th, giving him a copy of the letter replying to the letter of Tariq Aziz, which he sent to Arab League. And Secretary General was very much surprised and also happy. Surprised because we did not ask the Security Council to meet, and happy because we went through the international channel. The international channels tell us in the charter that you should first start with your regional organization, then if you failed from the regional organization, you go to the international organization, which is the United Nations. We followed that step because we respect the Charter of the United Nations, and we know that problems does occur between Arab countries, but it might be solved within that framework, which is the Arab countries. And the whole week of the 18th of July until the 29th of July, intense diplomacy was the attention, taking the full attention of Security Council and the United Nations and the international media.
The late Saudi monarch stressed that life and death were equal after the occupation of Kuwait, and there is no longer a difference between the kingdom and Kuwait, but rather one country. We live together or end together. This is the decision I took, and all Saudis agree with me. Apart from the political and military role in support of Kuwait, the kingdom hosted the country's legitimate leadership, as well as the political and social blocs. The Kuwaiti government then took to Al Taif, west of Saudi Arabia, as a headquarter. At the same time, the Kuwaiti government began to act as a legitimate government to work for the liberation of Kuwait by all means. And the late Emir Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmed al-Sabah issued an Emiri decree on August 3rd, in which the first article stipulated that the government of the state of Kuwait be temporarily held in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The historic conference began with the participation of 1,300 citizens from different sides, trends, and groups under Liberation the slogan. History recorded the angry national stance that was embodied in the historic Pledge of Allegiance Conference in Jeddah, October 1990, in which the efforts to retain Kuwait's soil and sovereignty began. Inside Kuwait, citizens rejected the blatant aggression and stood united to defend their beloved country, rejecting all orders by the occupying forces which subjected them to arrest, torture, and in many cases murder. Many stories of courage and sacrifice highlight the fight for Kuwait's liberation from the brutal August 2, 1990 occupation, where martyrdom was a shared duty amongst men and women in the resistance movement. The Kuwaiti people played a prominent role in resistance to the brutal Iraqi occupation and topped the scene with their heroism and sacrifices over the 7 months of the occupation. They were the voice of challenge against the invasion, playing pivotal and dangerous roles in providing food, health care, and all other services to the Kuwaiti society, and igniting the fierce resistance against the invasion. In addition to the involvement of some of them in the underground resistance and military operations, attacking regime troops and gathering intelligence for the Allies to restore their stolen homeland. The actions of the Kuwaiti resistance helped to retain the moral high ground for Kuwait in a way that politicians, diplomats, and public relations consultants could not. The first public acts against the occupation were demonstrations, mostly with women and children carrying banners and photos of the late Emir Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah and late Crown Prince Sheikh Saad al-Abdullah al-Sabah. Although the occupation forces isolated Kuwait from the outside world by cutting off communications since the beginning of the invasion, the martyr Asrar al-Gabandi brought out the voice of the resistance from inside occupied Kuwait to the international media, breaking the siege imposed by the aggressor.
Just want you to know that they are ripping everything apart in Kuwait, taking it to Baghdad. We don't have any guns. We don't have any arms. A lot of them, they have been killed. And the ones that they captured, they just, they've been taking them, torturing them, and they have been killing them.
Meanwhile, the resistance in the oil sector developed a plan to save as many of the oil fields as it could from destruction. They even helped the coalition forces fight off the invaders. The shape of the resistance grew out of the family that predominate in Kuwaiti life, so family members, friends, or colleagues, and these constituted their own authority. It is hard to put into words the remaining untold story of the Kuwaiti resistance of 1990 to 1991, during the brutal invasion on our beloved Kuwait, where men and women on the entire age spectrum valiantly risked their lives to fight back against the regime troops and thwart the occupation of their dear homeland.
I felt the 2nd of August and the 3rd of August that there is a resistance in Kuwait, that there is fighting. Kuwaiti forces are fighting the Iraqi forces. The people of Kuwait rejecting to cooperate at any rate with the Iraqi aggressors and leaderships, and trying to stimulate the Kuwaitis in order to join the so-called temporary government. And not a single Kuwaiti accepted to, be within that regime. And I was really very happy to report regularly to Security Council how the Kuwaiti people in Kuwait, under the aggression of the Iraqis, despite all the tremendous aggressive measures which has been taken to them, against them, they were very strong in fighting the aggression of Iraq. And thanks God, the Kuwaiti people in Kuwait, during the first 10 days, they sacrificed blood and they carried out all kinds of atrocities from the Iraq government, but no single body supported Iraq. The Iraqis were dying to hear for a Kuwaiti, prominent Kuwaiti or non-prominent Kuwaiti, to defend or to approve or to encourage the Iraqis to stay in Kuwait. Then also the Kuwaitis abroad, all the Kuwaitis whom were at that time tourists in the Middle East and the world, in most of the capitals in Europe, a lot of demonstration happened, Kuwaitis and the friends of Kuwait, against the Iraqi aggression. It was an important step. Beside the countries, now the people of Kuwait, inside Kuwait and outside Kuwait. If the people Kuwait inside, under the aggression, they were in demonstration and they were very strong in refusing the occupation, how about the people whom are at least free? All of them there were very strong against the occupation of Iraq, against the annexation of of Kuwait to Iraq, and they were defending the legitimate government of Kuwait.
In New York, the story of the liberation started within first hours of the invasion, where Kuwait delegation immediately requested an urgent meeting of the United Nations Security Council, which passed Resolution 660, condemning the invasion and demanding the withdrawal of all Iraqi forces. On August 6th, 5 days into the invasion, the Security Council adopted Resolution 661 and took steps to implement international sanctions on Iraq under Chapter 7 of the United Nations. Resolution 665 followed soon after, which authorized the naval blockade to enforce the sanctions.
And I went to the Secretary General, carrying with me an official letter to call Security Council, and from him I went to the President of the Security Council, which he has been also knowing the case. He came to the United Nations, and I went to Ambassador Pickering, the Ambassador of the United States. He gave me all the details of what happened on the ground during the last 4 hours, because at that time 4 hours has passed since they have entered the Kuwaiti border. And immediately my request was to call Security Council immediately for a meeting and to ask for a total withdrawal of all Iraqi forces to the border of 4 hours ago. One condition. Second condition, to make sure that no Iraqi will be left in the Kuwaiti territories. And I met the rest of 15 members of Security Council, and as I was expecting, all of them were full support. The remarks which I want to emphasize, that the resolution has been passed in the United Nations Security Council at 6:15, early morning. The whole of Security Council, the meeting room of Security Council was full of all members of the United Nations, not only the Security Council, because Kuwait has been attacked. Small country like Kuwait, with a peaceful desire, with a peaceful policies, will be attacked and swallowed by bigger neighbor, which we had excellent relation with them and which we were instrumental in helping them in their fight against Iran for 8 years. Therefore, from this position of, yes, from one part of my heart, the aggression itself, it was killing us. But from also the second part, the very strong stand of the member of the United Nations to Kuwait in respect of their sovereignty and territorial integrity was really giving me a hope that this case, with the support which we are witnessing, will be a successful case. And Resolution 661 has been passed on the 6th of August, imposing economical sanction against Iraq and saving the Kuwaiti assets in the world and freezing the Kuwaiti assets in Kuwait. And that was one of the most strong stand it has been taken ever by Security Council against an aggressor. We thought that this, which really was unprecedented, will cause Iraq to reconsider its position and to withdraw the troops.
One of the major efforts that led to the liberation of Kuwait came when the late Emir Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmed al-Sabah delivered a speech to the 45th session of the United Nations General Assembly on September 27, 1990. I come here today carrying a message from people who love peace and work for it, and who extended their hands in assistance to all those in need. He added, I came to you with a message from people whose country was, just yesterday, a model for peaceful coexistence and brotherhood with other nations, and a home where other people could meet safely. Today, these people are refugees holding on to hope, and others are being held captive or struggling and ready to sacrifice blood and soul, but not surrender and bow down to occupation. Sheikh Jabir reaffirmed in his speech that Kuwait, as always, would continue to aid just causes around the globe, noting that his nation was in need of assistance from friends around the world to end the injustice which befell upon his country. Since August the 8th, almost a week after the invasion, the first U.S. troops and aircrafts begin arriving on Saudi soil. And throughout August, the coalition forces steadily grew and took on a truly international character. The largest coalition since World War II was formed to oppose Iraq's aggression, consisting of forces from 34 countries: Argentina, Australia, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Egypt, France, Greece, Italy, Kuwait, Morocco, Netherlands, New Zealand, Niger, Norway, Oman, Pakistan, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Singapore, Spain, Syria, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, and was led by the United States. Despite the efforts made by the international community, Iraqi army did not change its attitude at all, and they remained in Kuwait, destroying the country, trampling on human rights. Under these circumstances, the UN Security Council passed a series of resolutions. One of the most important was Resolution 678, passed on the 29th of November 1990, which gave Iraq a withdrawal deadline until the 15th of January 1991, and authorized all necessary means to uphold and implement Resolution 660 and a diplomatic formulation authorizing the use of force if Iraq failed to comply.
And the first resolution which allowed the United Nations to use force has been passed at that very historical night, the 29th of November 1990. Here, the Allied forces have joined Kuwait. Kuwait, that single country, was able to establish Allied forces to defend Kuwait, consists of 33 countries, surely headed by the United States, United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, the rest of Gulf countries, but nevertheless, countries from Latin America, Argentina, Honduras, and Mexico, countries from Asia, countries from Africa, Nigeria, Niger, Morocco, all of them, they sent forces to Saudi Arabia to defend Kuwait. And the international community was really surprised. But not surprised because Africa has participated, but surprised because Kuwait, how much the name of Kuwait is important to the economy of the international community. Here was the legitimacy which the use of force has gained, not because of Security Council only, 15 members, not because of the United Nations only as officials, but because the people of the world has supported this effort.
Since the issuance of Resolution 678 on November 29th, 1990, the morale of the people of Kuwait has changed. At home, the threads of rescue emerged with global mechanisms, a collective international decision, a decisive will, and a determined decision. And with the Kuwaiti government in Taif, the coordination mechanisms between the international coalition and the government of Kuwait escalated with the preparation of necessary arrangements for liberation and preparing the devices for the return of hundreds of thousands of Kuwaitis have been displaced around the world. And consultations began on organizing the entry of coalition forces into Kuwait and coordinating with the Arab coalition. And under Resolution number 678, Specifically on January 12, 1991, the U.S. Congress agreed to give the late U.S. President George W. Bush the authority to use the U.S. armed forces in order to drive the Iraqi forces out of Kuwait. At midnight on January 17, 1991, the deadline set by the United Nations for the withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Kuwait had ended, and immediately after, President Bush gave the order for U.S. troops to lead an international coalition in an attack on Iraqi army. And that's when the Operation Desert Storm liberating Kuwait began.
On the 17th of January, the start of liberation of Kuwait started, the start of liberation. Iraq has been bombarded heavily from 17th until the 20th of February. From 17th of January until the 20th, which means a 23 days continuous bombardment, and also continuous meetings with the leader of Saddam Hussein. Now you have seen what happened to Iraq. You have seen Saddam Hussein, what happened to your people. You have seen how your airports does not exist. Your infrastructure does not exist. Come and accept this resolution and withdraw your forces. He was adamant.
Almost everyone with a television set saw the war of liberating Kuwait unfolding, bomb by bomb, shot by shot, night by night, on the evening news. This war, an epic clash of more than 1 million soldiers and thousands of aircrafts, missiles, warships, tanks, and artillery, had the grim distinction of being the first to be broadcast live around the world. The Allied jets conducted a massive air campaign bombing raid against Iraqi air defenses, communication systems, chemical weapons facilities, tanks, and artillery.
Until the 20th of February, when the first Navy forces entered Kuwaiti territories. On the 24th of February, after the successful entrance of the naval forces to Kuwaiti ports, the forces entered Kuwait territory. And from that moment, he realized that there is an end to his bloody battle, which caused all kind of destruction to their people and to their economy for years ahead. At that time only, he decided to withdraw his forces.
The period between the end of January and mid-February 1991 reveals the collapse of the morale of the Iraqi troops stationed in Kuwait due to the continuous airstrikes from the Allies, the interruption of supplies from Iraq. On February 24th, the ground operation commenced when coalition forces advanced and attacked Iraqi forces in Kuwaiti cities and in southern Iraq. Iraqi troops surrendered in droves and withdrew from Kuwait on February 26, 1991, after setting fire to Kuwait's oil fields. Then the U.S. President Bush announced the liberation of Kuwait 100 hours after the launch of the ground operations, saying his famous phrase, "Kuwait today is free."
Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. Kuwait is once more in the hands of Kuwaitis in control of their own destiny. We share in their joy, a joy tempered only by our compassion for their ordeal. Tonight, the Kuwaiti flag once again flies above the capital of a free and sovereign nation. I am pleased to announce that at midnight tonight, Eastern Standard Time, exactly 100 hours since ground operations commenced and 6 weeks since the start of Operation Desert Storm, all United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations. It is up to Iraq whether this suspension on the part of the coalition becomes a permanent ceasefire. At every opportunity, I have said to the people of Iraq that our quarrel was not with them, but instead with their leadership, and above all with Saddam Hussein. This remains the case. You, the people of Iraq, are not our enemy. We do not seek your destruction. We have treated your POWs with kindness. Coalition forces fought this war only as a last resort and look forward to the day when Iraq is led by people prepared to live in peace with their neighbors.
As part of a scorched earth policy, the Iraqi forces set fire to nearly 700 oil wells and placed landmines around the wells to make extinguishing the fires more difficult. The disaster began in the run-up to the coalition ground attacks in Kuwait. Anticipating a beach landing, Iraqi forces released oil from tankers into the sea and pumped it from the storage on land in order to create a sea of fire. By dumping 400 million gallons of crude oil into the Arabian Gulf, causing the largest offshore oil spill in history at that time. On land, trenches were filled with oil, which was then set on fire, a possible attempt to hide Iraqi forces from coalition airstrikes.
Because they knew that they will withdraw. They knew that they are losing. They put in fire almost 700 oil fields, totally put it in fire, totally. And the sky of Kuwait was just as if you are in midnight, the pollution which has beginning and does not have the end. But still, the liberation of Kuwait was worth it. We were so happy, and we have achieved what the Kuwaiti people deserve and what the leadership of Kuwait deserved at that time.
Freedom and respect for human rights find a home among all nations. The Gulf War put this new world to its first test. And my fellow Americans, we passed that test. For the sake of our principles, for the sake of the Kuwaiti people, we stood our ground, because the world would not look the other way. Ambassador El-Sabah, tonight, Kuwait is free. Where is it? We are very happy about that.
Surely Kuwait has been liberated in 26th of February 1991. We pushed Iraq to implement all relevant Security Council resolutions except the borders, and they accepted the borders in 1994 after a lot of surely trying to delay the total and the official recognition of the border. We put several requests, fundamental requests, that the recognition of the decision of Security Council and the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Kuwait should not be only from the government of Iraq, but it should be from the Revolutionary Council, which is headed by Saddam Hussein, and from the government of Iraq, and from Parliament of Iraq. And all these decisions supposed to be put officially in the official gazette of Iraq. They have an official gazette like any other countries. They call it Al-Waqa'i', as we have our national gazette, we call it Kuwait al-Yawm. I requested that as a condition for total acceptance of the border, and that happened. The issues which has remained was the prisoner of war, the missing people, and the properties, and the stolen commodities which has been at large, and the compensation. We put these items under Chapter 7, sanction, that the sanction will be continued on Iraq until all these other 4 issues will be terminated at our satisfaction. That was the so-called the sanction against Iraq, which means the sanction against Iraq, the economic sanction against Iraq, did not stop after the liberation of Kuwait and the return of the legitimate government, but until all the rest, the refugees, the missing people, the return of all these commodities, and the compensation. And there were 2 other issues related to America, like the weapon of mass destruction. These are the items which still existing, it was still existing against Iraq until 2003. (2003) was a new page, because the people of Iraq has rebelled against their government, but he used the force against his own people. The United States, they refused to get rid of all their mass destruction weapons. Therefore, the United Nations took another decision that either they will remove their mass destruction weapons, or they will be subjecting themselves to another use of force. The other use of force has not been authorized by the United States, by the United Nations or Security Council. United States took the issue on their shoulder, and they liberated Iraq from Saddam Hussein during 2003. And Kuwait was the first country in the Gulf to start to support the new regime of liberated Iraq, because we were helping them during the very critical months which the people of Iraq were suffering from the regime. Therefore, I mean, they appreciated well. As soon as Iraq has been liberated from Saddam Hussein's regime and the new government has been formed, a national government, so we started to help them. Sheikh Sabah was the first leader from Arab countries to visit Iraq. There was a summit which supposed alphabetically to be held in Baghdad, and it has been held in Iraq in 2004. And Sheikh Sabah really was the first leader, and I was with him to attend the summit in Baghdad. At that time, I was already in Kuwait. I left 2003, I left New York as permanent representative. And Sheikh Sabah decided to really help reconstructing the Iraqi economy and support for the Iraqi government.
Kuwaiti people remember with pain the invasion of their neighbor, Iraq. However, they demonstrate how they also overcome their wounds and forgive. Kuwait was keen on Iraq's exit from Chapter 7, which is to oblige Iraq to implement the international resolutions related to its invasion of Kuwait, in a step that is considered a concession by the Kuwaiti side in order to heal the Arab rift. And accordingly, 2013 witnessed Iraq's exit from that provision. With Iraq, Kuwait's vision of investing in peace and good neighbor showed the coherence of the course future policy towards Iraq, despite the events that passed through it. After IS rolled back from Iraq, Kuwait rapidly organized a conference to support the reconstruction of Iraq and pledged $100 million for the humanitarian needs of Iraqis and the reconstruction of liberated cities. The Donors Conference, organized by Kuwait in February 2018, was a milestone in the relations between Iraq and Kuwait. It was also the culmination of a long process supported by Kuwait to accept Iraq again in the Arab and Islamic incubator. Then, the late Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah's visit to Iraq on 2019 was a clear demonstration of an honest will to promote bilateral agreements and overcome differences to move forward for a better future. Moreover, Kuwaiti contributions to the reconstruction of Iraq are another example of the state of Kuwait's endeavor to build bridges of cooperation and independence, to strengthen the Arab ranks, and Kuwait's financial aid extended through its economic and development funds to include its Arab neighbors and sisters in the form of grants, development, and economic projects, and loans in its belief in the unity and Arab solidarity. Furthermore, the Iraqi governments have expressed close cooperation regarding the file of missing persons and prisoners, and handed over to Kuwait a number of the remains of some Kuwaiti missing persons in Iraq over the past decade. Kuwait has identified 274 remains out of 605 martyrs, and Kuwait recently received from Iraq the third batch of Kuwaiti property and archives that were seized during the Iraqi invasion in 1990. Relations between Iraq and Kuwait have made great strides forward, thanks to the wisdom and desire of the leaderships of the two countries to overcome the remnants of the past. Three decades have passed since the invasion of Kuwait, which has carved out an irreparable scar in the heart of every Kuwaiti. The invasion and the moments of liberation can most certainly never be forgotten in the minds of every citizen. Kuwaitis and the world will always recall the efforts of leaders and heroes of brotherly and friendly countries who took all necessary measures to liberate Kuwait and free its people. The invasion martyrs' heroic sacrifices made in the name of their sovereign homeland are eternally immortalized in our very essence.